Latterwave. It's a Latterwave. I feel it every time. I can't help it. Dude, it's so good to see you. God bless you. I got Gonza Memes de los Últimos Días. Memes of the final days, the ultimate days, in Argentina. Good to see you, bro. Che,
Thank you, man.
what's up?
Good to see you.
And live from the airport, Latter Day Chad. What's it up? What's up? Where are you at?
I'm in Wisconsin. I just flew in for the Mormon Ojibwe meetup thing where Chief Mitiga's going there, and there's gonna be the rabbis and stuff.
It's gonna be crazy,
Yeah,
exciting stuff, man. That's super cool. So I know, like both of us, all of us have been looking at really a lot of crazy things. Talking first off, a couple years ago, I did my Tartaria deep dive into all of this lost culture thing, and then the last few days, last few months even, we've been looking at the Native American tribes and how diverse their cultures are. And when I say Native American tribes, I don't just mean the heartland, I don't just mean the Mesoamerican model. We're looking at multiple migrations over periods of thousands of years, maybe, according to history, that are in between each other. And they have different cultures to an extent, but also you can see where they've been through the world and how those cultures have influenced them. Nomadic people will assimilate certain things from different cultures. So those things are actually present as well. And Chad's pulling up all these pictures now where he's like, hey, what do you think about this guy? Does this guy look, does he look, where does he look like he's from?
well,
Where's that Indian look like he's from? Where's that Native
is
American look
that
like he's
guy
from?
Asian? Like they say that everyone in all the Native Americans that came over Bering Strait in some great migration from Siberia or something, right? And but not all the Native Americans look like that. And you see different combinations of different looks, but I was able to pull up at least three distinct phenotypes. Do you have the meme there to pull up?
Let me try to get it on my screen here at very least. I've got, let's see here. Here is let me go back a couple. So at least this one here you can see three completely different
Yeah.
haplogroup types. That's like
Well,
kind of the
well,
point.
that's the thing. Like when I was, I first started looking up, I was like, okay, show me Ojibwe Native Americans. Like I just Googled that, and most of them look like they have some sort of like European, Middle Eastern admixture in there, and those are the guys that have haplogroup X. And then I compared that because there are like Siberian looking Native Americans, like the Inuits, right? Like up in Alaska and stuff. And it's like, okay, yeah, those guys obviously came up the Bering Strait and they do look Asian. And then you've got like these sort of Mesoamerican that they look almost like I don't know how to describe it. Like it's Asian still, but it's like a different type of Asian, right? Than like the Siberian. But like pull up
Right.
that video of the husband and the wife Ojibwe. Like
And so it gets
they
really
look
deep when you look at it also from like China because today like, let's look at ethnic minorities in China and you'll see because China's this huge place, but it was at one point called Tartaria and you can look up the Tartaricum Bellicum, which will show you that the first Jesuit travels from the Catholic Church when they were going into China and how they were like, well, there's really just so many different the Tartars have all of these different tribes, the Uyghurs, etc. And there's the Manchurians who run things. And this is all before a plague. Because when the plague comes, the Manchurians die out essentially. And now you have the Han Chinese. And today, when you think of China, you think of this one group, the Han Chinese, because essentially they've ethnically assimilated. I think is the YouTube friendly word. Most of China, but if you start to look into it and you see they have three or four or 500 languages that have been suppressed but still to an extent exist, maybe about 50, 30 or 50 that are still spoken in China. And then you think about Tibet. And God, I mean, if you've been paying attention again, right, to the Uyghurs, right? The Uyghurs are essentially the same. I mean, if you look at the picture that you have here and you can see the clothing types, then compare this to the Tartarians, right? And the Tartarians, if I can find some of the pictures of their clothing here, but at the very least, looking at what we know, Tartarian map, you can see
well,
that they had.
well, I think that clothing it might be from like the Catholic and Orthodox priests that encountered the Mi'kmaq. I think that one is a picture of Mi'kmaq, not Ojibwe. And I do know that they had some heavily Catholic influence where they got a bunch of Catholic Orthodox type clothing. So that might be the
Absolutely.
case. I'm not sure.
And that's the scary thing too, because the Catholics did a lot of inversion. But if you look at the natural clothing types, Tartarians across Eurasia, so from Spain all the way to East Russia, into Korea, because Korea connects China and Russia, you'll find the same outfits, and even in Taiwan, which was Formosa, which is a place that for a long time was allowed to keep its indigenous culture, you'll find feathers, right? And so this is an interesting thing too, because you'll not just find feathers in Native American tribes, you also find that in Egyptian tribes and Semitic tribes. It's very important. The birds is something that's associated with the seraph. And as we look now at the idea of the seraph being a serpent, but we know that serpents are considered dragons, and today with genetics that birds are they're reptiles, right? The idea that there's something there that might have been made extinct, that's a bit more of that missing link between the bird and the lizard that is the seraph that we're experiencing in nature. I mean, these are all things that are told in these stories, right? These fantastical creatures that existed in this civilization, and what unites it? There's a Christ-like figure. I think it's Jesus Christ, but he's far different than the way that the Catholic Church teaches it. He's
Okay,
more of a
I
leader with a
I have
sword.
a crazy. Have you ever seen One Piece?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So is this like the Void Century where there's like history has been completely rewritten and the only
Yeah.
thing we have of the real history is the Book of Mormon?
Yeah, it's
I
one of those
completely think
things.
that's the case, man. The whole
So
idea I wanted to talk
so the
about
Book of
today
Mormon's
was
like the road
about
poneglyph to
the
find the One Piece. Here's a
I wanted
crazy
to talk
idea.
about the
So I
erasure of history. You
so
even see scriptures today, and they are not what are supposed to be. You got uh, most Bible today, like the King James Bible, for example, got translated from a text called the Masoretic text, which is in Hebrew. But when there are older copies of the Bible, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint that's written in Greek, and all this Bible, older version of the Bible, got another chronology, got the ages of the patriarch, the forefathers of Abraham. Since the flood, they lived hundreds of years, but uh, when it comes to the Masoretic text, they got erasure. The lifespan suddenly shortened. It's
Right.
amazing.
Which we
you know
see also historically when we look at life now. So we're seeing today in places in East Asia and some of these island places where there's bicentennials, people that live more than 100 years to this day, and they seem to be capping even then at around 120. Now, what is the biblical story of the deluge? We have a flood. Noah's living 700 years. Everybody's living a long time. All of a sudden, there's a cap. God puts the Elohim put a cap on human life plan that we're not supposed to live for 7 centuries. It's going to be
you know
120
I
years,
might
right?
know something more recent about that. So I wasn't planning on saying this to anyone really, but Science Media already mentioned this on one of their videos. One of the only people that knew about this. But essentially, I ran into some people through a mutual friend. They're friends with like certain apostles in the church and stuff apparently. And there's apparently this group that's hidden away somewhere in like Central or South America that is a group of light-skinned Indians, and they have beards, and they wear the same symbols on their clothing that we have on our garments. And they know who they are, and there was some sort of expedition where they apparently sent people to find the church or something, right? And there was documents about all this stuff. So I'm hearing this secondhand from some people that supposedly encountered this group of people, and they're like waiting for the right time to return after this great sort of visions of glory type destruction happens. And then entirely separately, the guys at Zion's Media, they're telling me about it. Another guy, completely different guy, is telling them the same story, except for he's somebody that's like stationed at Adam on Diamond, because they have people at Adam on Diamond who are like called to work there and prepare it for the Lord, and he like owns property there or something. And he's like, no, I'm aware of this group of people, and they are going to return. So when we're getting into like the lost tribe stuff, people need to realize that like the Native Americans, like with the Heartland, Great Lakes stuff, that's the remnant of Joseph. That's not the lost tribes. There are lost tribes that are going to return. Doctrine and Covenants talks about the lost tribes returning, right? The Book of Mormon talks about the lost tribes returning and how a lot of the Gentiles won't be able to handle that stuff. Now, here's the crazy theory. We know that the lost tribes are hidden somewhere in the north. Is it possible that the Tartarians after this empire, because I'm not familiar with this Tartarian history or anything, apparently there's this great Tartarian empire that's been covered up. Is it possible that they went into the hollow earth or something? Is that a theory that's there?
So that's totally what most of these tribes believe. And so if you look, and I've been to a lot of the places in South America where these tribes are, and it's amazing how I've always thought this without, at the time, I wasn't trying to connect it spiritually. So I just thought, oh, that's really interesting. You know, I thought it was really interesting that before the Roman architecture, because here's the thing, this idea that Spain is coming there, bringing military architects who have studied Roman architecture, thousand-year-old, and they understand neoclassical architecture, and that they're building these aqueducts, viaducts, Buenos Aires, and these amazing mountainous cities in Colombia with these cathedrals and things. That doesn't really add up when you look at what the Europeans were capable of building after that point versus the ancient structures we're looking at. And when I say ancient, I just mean prehistoric, and when I say prehistory, I just mean things that have been erased because they had their own history. We just burned all these books. But you go to Titicaca and you see stones, you know, the Graham Hancock thing. You see these giant things that people would rather say aliens did than explain how people that weren't European could have done this. That's basically what it comes down to. They can't accept the idea that there was right.
So
are you familiar with the Ica stones?
Of course, exactly. Laser cut, you can't even cut them today without diamond cut tools, but really you need laser to do it with that level of precision, and they interlock in ways that we've seen. This exists in Malta, in Machu Picchu, in Turkey at Mount Ararat, at these really specific sites that Mount Everest, even in Nepal, there are some stones like this. So it makes you wonder, who is this culture that's made its way all over the world? That's the other thing that's crazy about it. We start to see it everywhere. Star Forts is the big one with Tartaria. Everywhere you go, there are these crazy citadels. There's ones in Argentina. There's ones in Brazil. They're in Hawaii, Russia, Africa, in Texas. It's just the idea that there was so much of this connecting at one point, and then afterwards it's erased, right?
Dude, that's the seal of Melchizedek.
Exactly. And this is how they build their cities. Every single one. Every single one. Some of them are actually pentagonal, but then they'll have the octagonal stars are the main ones, and they'll have a river system. It's almost invariably a river system runs around it. So they'll take swampland and they'll turn it into fresh water, and in the process they produce a water wheel which they can use for industrial purposes.
Is this like some Starbase Kolob type shit? Or
this is Starbase Kolob stuff right here. Complizzard says, within inner Earth core is a spaceship inside. Thank you for bringing me back to the subject matter. So if you were to look at all these tribes and ask them what happened, right? Because they're like, well, I'm like, wow, you get on the back of a motorcycle from a Quechua guy and he brings you up into the mountains and you see some ancient ruins. You want to know what's their version of the story. And they say that, well, there was a major alert because we knew what was coming and we had to go underground. And a lot of the time for a century, the Hopi story, the Quechua story, the Warani story is that they went underground into the tunnels or into the caverns of these mountains for a century. And what's crazy about that is that's the same story in Turkey, right? They have a similar story about a deluge. And so some stories are Noah's Ark, but there's also two versions of that from the Deuteronomists. So the idea that it's only Noah who survives, that's not necessarily implied either, because in the Book of Mormon we see the Jaredites, right? And there's a couple other examples where it sounds like there might have been simultaneously. I mean, even in the Epic of Gilgamesh, it doesn't say that Noah is the only ark, but it's the one that's protected by the Elohim.
Yes,
by Yahweh.
You brought an interesting fact right there. And I've been thinking about this for ages, about the possibility of multiple pockets of population surviving the deluge, multiple arcs. because here's the thing: we got the story of Noah and her sons, and that's important because we believe that Noah had the priesthood keys. He got the authority of God. He was important because of that, and Ham and Shem and Japhet, they all were the forefathers of Europe, uh, north of Africa, and
India.
Canaan.
Shem is supposed to be
But
for India too.
but here's the thing: it's no way that all of these people will repopulate the whole earth, and we got multiple myths in other points of the world about people surviving the deluge. How is that even possible? We got, the myth of the Mapuche people in southern Chile.
Right.
The myth is about two giant snakes, Tren Tren and Kai Kai, and one is the god of the water, and the other is the god of the mountains. And the god of the mountains protect people and made the mountains elevate upon the sea, and the creature of the water makes the water arise and destroy the whole civilization. And uh, this is so significant because we got the serpent again, the serpent and the mountain. The mountain was a temple, and the serpent on the mountain, the high serpent, the serpent of the sky, is a symbol of the priesthood of Christ. And what are we dealing with here? Uh, the 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 serpent of the sea is a symbol of the devil, of Leviathan, that is
Leviathan, yeah.
present in all of these myths in the neighborhood of the Israelite people.
So we should
So
expand on that because I don't think everyone knows what we're talking about, but it's really worth it. So the Mapuche tribe, by the way, when the Third Reich came to South America and they ended up in Argentina, they realized one of the safest places they could go was Bariloche because it's right at the border here. There's a volcano, they can power everything they need, and they can get in and out whenever they need to. But the tribes here are very different than the rest of South America. For one thing, they're super tall. The Mapuche are twice as tall as, say, the Quechua. I mean, it's crazy. And also, they have different facial features. A lot of Mapuche have blue eyes, and I think they even had blue eyes before the Germans and Spanish. So there's something about that too. Their belief, like he said, is that there are two serpents. This is one of them. The idea that the entire western coast of South America is a giant leviathan that's been somewhat fossilized and destroyed and is being mined for its lithium salts, very popular amongst the conspiracy minded people of North Chile and the Atacama. Simultaneously, the idea that this is the other serpent, and it's interesting, even like the idea of this being a mouth. This is very commonly believed by the mestizo. It's a heritage myth, right? This is the mouth of the serpent, right? That closed eventually because at some point this was actually open, and you can see where this sediment has drifted in, the amount of gold and deposits for exploding mountains so they could wash away mountains to get the gold out. This is all poured in here into the mouth of the serpent, right? The cutting off of the head. But that's, I think, an interesting myth, especially considering that you only can see that from space. You know, like the idea that the Mapuche had this tribal myth that the continents were giant leviathans fighting over each other, and that these land masses are essentially they have some, like, these are the stories of titans, right? And that's very much what the Jews believed in, what the Greeks believed, with that entire region. They have a very similar belief structure. And I'm a big fan of the there be dragons thing. Like, if a bunch of people are talking about it, there's probably some truth to it. You're muted.
Yeah, I have a question. So you're talking about this Tartaria thing about how there was some sort of time in history where there's like a void century where everything was rewritten. When did this happen? I'm
So this is the thing. There's actually a couple periods here, and one is if you look at the new chronology. So Fomenko, Anatoly Fomenko, was a Russian. He is a Russian mathematician who works for the Russian Federation and worked for the Soviet Union. And in the 1920s, Russia didn't use our calendar system. They had their own Russian calendar, which was more accurate, and it was connected to the Arabic calendar, which is very similar to the Jewish calendar. It works in 19 years moon cycles and everything. But they tried to find a way to westernize, and they found that they couldn't align certain dates. And they started wondering what the deal with that was. And this is a big reason why people worry about the Catholic Church, because who did this? Who was in charge of the dates? Well, the Gregorians and the idea of the church running the calendar. It seems like at a certain point, the time when Constantinople is conquered and they have to leave Istanbul, right? Up until that point, the calendars are synchronized. And after that, the Catholic Church doesn't take seriously or doesn't want to validate what's going on in Constantinople now that it's Muslim. And so they ignore that calendar, and then they create this kind of vague new chronology. And one of the things that they do is they act like everything is a lot further back than it is. And so there's 2 points. One is the Pseudo-Isidorian decrees, and the other is the 19th century. Because in the 19th century, then people are starting to figure this out, and you have the Napoleonic Wars. During the Napoleonic period, 1811, 1812, there's a finalization of the erasure of history. But up to that point, for the last maybe 300 or 400 years, we can consider the Crusades as actually an effort to destroy the remnants of this monolithic belief structure. And you might think to yourself, what does it matter if Jesus was 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, right? But if it was 1900 years ago, or I mean, sorry, 900 years ago or 100 years ago, it changes everything. If Jesus was within your grandparents' lifetime, it's very different than if Jesus was 1,000 years ago. So by distancing how far Jesus was from our past, then they're able to also confuse. I mean, you have to understand the Muslims believe in Jesus. He's in the Quran too. So it's able to distance everyone from the idea of studying what Christ was really doing at that time, which was, I mean, according to the Bible, he has a sword and he's bringing a debt jubilee, right? It's very different than this pacifist Che Guevara character that the Catholic Church pushes on everybody.
Listen to this. So there's this guy, I forget his name. He goes on the Science Media channel. He was doing a live stream, and he's talking about how maybe the timeline in the Book of Mormon is off, is because there seems to be these 2 different events in history. These 2, like this destruction that goes up from Mesoamerica up to Canada, and it's all centered around this war with Quetzalcoatl, who, that's Jesus, right? And it's like, yeah, it's weird. It's like it seems like there's 2 different accounts where one of them happened at like 400 AD and the other one happened at like 700 AD. So which is it? Whoa.
If you have the chime, I know this is like a little esoteric, but I think we're into that these days. These are the line chronology synchronicities found by Anatoly Fomenko. And so one of the things he'd be is and he does this hundreds of times, but he'll find the same 10 generations, birthday to death day, with the same amount of years in between, right? And so you have to imagine, how crazy would it be that Justinian II has the same birthday as Zedekiah, and his son, Heraclonius, has the same death day and birthday as Jerichonia, and Constantine IV, their son, has the same death day and birthday as Jerichonia. This goes on, right? And so eventually you have to hypothesize, is this real? Or is this just a duplication of somebody else's 10 generations of kings with the names changed to justify the taking over of this region? Where's Justinian? That's Turkey, right? Where's Turkey? That's Constantinople. That's Istanbul. That's where the Catholic Church is kicked out of, and why they have to go to Rome, and why they have to justify their existence, validated with this obscure St. Peter story that isn't historically validated by anything.
It wasn't even the successor of the church. It was James the Just and Mary Magdalene.
But so not only do they have to try to use that obscure fact or datum, they have to then say it's the most important thing. It's actually that it was Peter was the more important one. We're more important than you, because they're not equal, right? They're not actually meeting on an equal footing. And this is stuff that we're not supposed to talk about, I think. Like Bruce McConkie even was told, don't talk about this stuff. But if you think about it, this is exactly how it's worked, that the same weapon, Christianity, has been used to hide the truth on one hand through one group that is the sheeps and the goats, right? In Revelation, there are missions to distort the message of Christ, and I think that we see that all over the world.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
it's
can even
interesting.
see that
So
in archaeology. We see they did the exact same thing with Esh- with Egypt history. They started measuring the chronology of Egypt based on the findings of Champollion, that he he started using the Bible to measure Egypt history, and then he started they use the the chronology established by them to discredit the history of the Bible. So what happened was that they say, "Oh, we got the story of Exodus mentioning the city of Ramses. So maybe Ramses was the pharaoh of the Exodus." And then we say, no, it couldn't be, because Ramses was one of the greatest and more powerful pharaohs ever, and he never faced anything like what is written in the Bible. But when today we find that under the city of Ramses was a place full of tombs of Israelite and Semitic people, and it all matches the Bible, but is dated hundreds of years before Ramses, then they say, "Oh no, so the Bible say it was Ramses, but so it couldn't have happened in the Middle Kingdom of
I
Egypt."
mean, even the
That's a
name
nonsense.
Ra Moses, right? Ra Moses. It means like born of Ra, right? That's like what the name means, and it would make sense because he's being raised as an Egyptian priest. And the idea, I mean, Freud talked about this, but even he was afraid to say this because he knew that even at that, I mean, it's not for the Mormons, but for the Jews, that the Jews would be upset if he talked about Josephus and Moses, the connections to Akhenaten and Amarna, right? The idea of Akhenaten, who is a Semitic descendant of Yuya, who ends up in the royal family, looking very different, by the way, than the other pharaohic family. And then moving the capital to a new city in the desert for 40 years called Amarna, where they worship the Son of God. Autonism is the worship of the Son of God, right? And then he's just the city's destroyed, disassembled, and he has this mass flight exodus, right? He ends up being killed. I mean, there's a lot to it that seems there's an Egyptian version of the story, and then there's the Semitic nomadic tribe keeping the legacy of their story, even though that might be shifted because we know once they settle down in the new kingdom, the stories change, right? Like the Jewish history of 12 tribes becomes the history of one kingdom. And when that happens, we do lose some things.
For sure, for sure. That's definitely something worth noticing. And what I think is interesting is when this documentary called uh, Exodus Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus, they started talking about the possibility of uh, the whole story happened in the Middle Kingdom. That's around 14 uh, one one 140-60. Uh, but the Egyptologists dismissed completely this. They called it fiction, even though they found a tomb of somebody that resembled Joseph, uh, a, a whole population of Semitic people living in Goshen, the exact same area mentioned in scriptures. And we gotta think that nothing of this happened. There's this whole correlation are just fiction.
I mean, it's really
What
hard when you
can
have kingdoms and states because they have to. I mean, this is it makes a lot more sense for us. We want to know the truth. I think a state wants to keep control of their state, and when they worry that hey, there's a I mean, for particularly with Israel being a place that's recently established on the grounds of people being there in the past, it's probably concerning to a state that you could prove that there were people there before those people. So you can say, "Oh wow, actually, they have a right to be here," and that would be
like
really
the Hope
difficult.
was
This is a big problem for the Egyptians and in Israel today. But you have to imagine in America, even Native American tribes, like how is this working with the Bureau of Land Management and what a tribe's allowed to have in terms of sovereignty?
Yeah, like them destroying all the Heartland artifacts and stuff and saying all the Michigan relics are fake. And then even though the Smithsonian themselves find some of the Michigan relics in the roots of a tree and had to cut it out so it couldn't have been planted there. Here's something interesting. So you're saying that there's this fake history and stuff, right? Do you think that it would cause an uproar if, say, there was a group of Native Americans that had a large history that they kept underground after the settlers came here, and they're planning on publicly releasing it at some conference with a bunch of rabbis and Mormons? Do you think that would cause an upheaval?
I'm what I'm a big fan of is the sleeper upheaval. So what you like to do is get it out, get it everywhere, and then about a year later, everyone gets it. You know what I mean? By that point, it's too hard to remove it from to scrub it. So all they can do is kind of build around it and try to justify it. And so obviously, I think we're seeing this already. It's not just Midigot, and I'm super stoked that it's happening. But in Africa, in Timbuktu, in the last 5 years, they've been releasing all sorts of Songhai Empire manuscripts, which are not, they do not, they completely contradict Catholic history, right? And it's going to be really hard for people to justify. I mean, if you're saying things that happened in the 7th century happened in the 17th century and vice versa, it's going to be really a confluence of what are we saying about the Jesuit suppression period? Because the 17th century is when the Jesuits are excommunicated from the Catholic Church for 50 years. Their lands are stolen. There's genocide in Paraguay. The Catholic Church goes after all of these priests wearing black who were most familiar with running the show and committing this, what we're calling apostasy. And then 50 years later, they dig up the dead body of a pope, they excommunicate him, and they put themselves back in charge of the Catholic Church. So the 17th century, the 18th century is wild for the Catholic Church in terms of how much power they have taking over the world before they start to institute states. But also, you have to think of the 7th century, because the 7th century is when Islam is happening. That's amazing to think about. There's a group of people that don't believe exactly what the Catholic Church says, that have a story about Jesus. And granted, I'm sure Islam has changed a lot in the many centuries it's been since it was created. But clearly, there's something about the difference that we're seeing. Like, wait, they have more books, they have more scriptures, they have actual pieces of the same stories of the apostles, and simultaneously, you have the Merovingian Carolingian dynasty. So in France has now got this Blackwater troop paramilitary organization putting on Roman centurion surplus and janissary gear, going out, raping, murdering, and forcing people to convert, that you will die, and when you die, you get to serve me as a Lord in heaven, which is, by the way, not the way Christianity was originally taught.
Here's something else. So you mentioned France. I'm imagining that's with like the Mary Magdalene stuff.
Right.
So I have seen some of the. I don't think this is from Chief Native guy. I think this is from another Native American guy, another document, and it got my attention. These things are getting shared around because it mentions like a priesthood of Mary Magdalene and of Miriam, Moses' sister, right? And we know Dave Butler was talking about that stuff. It also talks about the mounds and it calls them the high places, which that's what King Josiah was destroying. He was destroying the high places. And when they're talking in this document about building the mounds, they're like, let's go to our high places and worship the mother and the father there, right? So that has some very interesting implications there. But
So there's
also,
a
it literally talks about the entire Holy Grail bloodline. Like, you know how in the Bible it has this whole bloodline, like Abraham was the son of so and so, was the son of so and so, was the son of so and so. It just goes back and back, right? It has that going back to Jesus and Mary Magdalene, these French royalty in it. And I'm not sure if that's part of what's going to be released tomorrow or not. but it stood out a lot to me because I was reading it. I'm like, holy crap, this is so connected to stuff I was reading.
So a lot of people in Paris are known for having black hair, which is not very common in, let's say, North France, where everyone has red hair because they're Normans, or in Basque France, where everyone has red hair because they're Basque. It's a lot of redheads, which I think is also interesting considering all of this. But the Parisians a lot of the time have black hair. Not always, but a big reason is because there was a huge connection in the ancient world between Syria, Damascus, as in Syria, and of course Turkey, like we've said, because Turkey was where a lot of people thought Jesus was actually from. So during this period in history, up until now, it's like everyone says it's Israel. That's just taken for granted. That's not the way it was in the past. For a long time, people thought Jesus died in Constantinople. And there's pictures, there's paintings, there's all sorts of everything that you could ever think about. People used to do pilgrimages to go visit because they wanted to see the remnants of the crucifix. Here's a picture of one of the paintings of Christ where you can see Istanbul, Constantinople in the background, right? Because it would just take, everyone would paint this and just assume that this was the case. But at the time, Constantinople wasn't called that. It wasn't named after Constantine yet, right? It was called Jerusalem, like Jerusalem. So it's really another interesting aspect that the French, the idea of this large trail and this a completely different version of what we think about when we think about the time and place of Christ, because you're thinking about a Christ that has castles and architecture, these star forts. He's in a citadel. He's not just walking through a desert where there's nothing. It's not just a completely backwards reality from what we're familiar with. It's far closer to our reality. And to see how the Pharisees were treating people, it makes a lot of sense, because that's exactly where the world leads today. We are in a place where we're talking about, I mean, this is also back to Noah. So in the book of, when they talk about Noah, at the end of the flood, he gets out of the boat and he does a sacrifice. You remember this part? But there's no call for it. God didn't say make a sacrifice. The whole point of the flood was everything was clean. So by making a sacrifice, he brought bloodletting and atonement back into the world. He created something, he brought something back in that God didn't actually want, didn't say to do.
I think this is interesting because it relates to the idea that Dr. Longo was presenting on the other stream the other day about this sacrifice, the sacrifice being like a mockery of the atonement of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Like we can get to do whatever we want, and later we can kill a chicken or something like that, and everything's fine, all's forgiven. You can do you, and everything's awesome. And this is really interesting because I was studying about the Nehor, the order of Nehor on the Book of Mormon, and what the conclusion that they were having about this is that there was a cult about Horus, the Egyptian god Horus, and the order of Nehor basically they do that. Horus was like an apostate version of Christ, a fake Christ. They get to do whatever they want, and later they just offer a sacrifice, like a mockery of a sacrifice, totally without the the repenting and the atonement working on that. And you can see about that on the Michigan tablet. They got this picture of priests throwing things to the fire, like offering a sacrifice, but they weren't the priest of God. They weren't the priest of Christ.
Yeah, it's weird how like Christianity today is known for being like a voodoo blood ritual where you can be the most evil person you can as long as you can find something else that can take the price and take its blood. Which to me sounds like some weird, really, it's just, yeah, it sounds like the weirdest the way I was taught, that would be the weirdest heathen anti-Christian possible thing, and yet Christianity has been turned into that. And then native tribes and all of these cultures around the world seem to be a lot closer to what Christ was trying to do and trying to fix all of those things. It seems like there's a book that's coming out I really want to recommend. I'm super lucky because Jonah Barnes let me check out some of the early draft stuff, and he's been recording it. I'm buying it. I want you all to probably do it too. Not just because you can read it, but because the bruh has actually gone with John Butler, John Butler, DJ Butler, and recorded himself reading it. And it's awesome to hear Jonah Barnes. Like, he's just hilarious. So it's really worth hearing his voice. But also, we're going to have him on the show to talk about this. I just wanted to finish it first. This book is wild for so many reasons. There's also a meta here with the keystone, because a major thing with the star forts are all these giant keystone spots around the world. Keystone, Tartaria. I should pull that up actually, just randomly. Keys. Doesn't matter. We'll go back to that. The point is, in this book, he talks a lot about how Christianity has changed and Judaism has changed, and the Semitic belief that Satan wasn't the adversary of God who hated God, but hated man, right? Because he was told he had to prostrate himself before Adam. And that this is a really interesting thing because he thinks he's the senior to Adam. And even though Adam is the newer thing, God's telling him that he has to respect Adam, right? And so it also calls in, what are we supposed to do? What is it that is like the point of humanity? This becomes more important when we see literally it almost seems like there's not a million different religions. It seems like there's two. There's like blood sacrifice or not, you know? It's like literally a line that Moses drew. We're at that point. Sorry if that was too intense. I don't know.
I think that's quite interesting because it relates with what the Book of Mormon said about being two church, the Church of Christ and the Church of the Devil.
Yeah, I mean, legitimately. I also wanted to pull up the Pseudo-Isidore decrees. I mentioned that earlier, but just for a little background. So, Carolingian era, pseudo, you get the idea right there. These were a bunch of forgeries. They basically took a bunch of paper, wrote up a bunch of lies, and then soaked them in coffee and said they were 1,000 years old. Long story short.
Wait, hey,
And what they did with that's so important, why it's so important, is because at this point, priests could marry and have families. So anywhere you went in the Catholic Church, priests were having families, and this was really important because, like the Muslims and like the Jews, they could cultivate an intellectual, spiritual community where people were part of that, and you didn't feel like the most religious people were just, sterilized out of the genetic pool. All of a sudden, the Catholic Church says, no, you're not allowed to get married. We get to own all of your property. Your kids are altar boys. They're bastards. You're going to have to raise them as monks, and we're going to be in charge of your land. And they're like, there's no historical precedent for that. Well, check out these Pseudo-Isidorian decrees we just soaked in coffee that we say are 1,000 years old.
Yeah, could you pull up the chat from Frizzle Fritz real quick?
Okay, yeah. Where do I find that? Is it Instagram?
Up there, above. No, it's in the chat.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Frizzle Fritz. I hope Chad can sometime soon share what he knows about Satan being able to change matter, because there's a lot of tangential research showing up in biology supporting this recently. I agree with that.
How does that guy know that I know about that? It's so weird. What?
Well, do it. Talk about that. We should talk about that. I think that's a major reason why you're supposed to shake his hand.
I don't know, man. I can't shake a hand through here, but it's interesting. It is. There is a lot of stuff that's going to be good. I get the feeling that, for example, the Mitiga stuff dropping, it does show a change that's going to happen in the world. And I don't think that there's going to be any going back from that after it's changed. And I think there's going to be some sort of collapse. Right? I think it's, just read 3rd Nephi 21. You'll get it.
Here, I'm pulling it up. 3rd Nephi 21. Let's do it.
That's exactly what's happening right now. And That's what I feel. That's the fulfillment of this.
And verily I say unto you, I give up unto you a sign that ye may know the time when these things shall be about to take place, that I shall gather in from their long dispersion my people, O house of Israel, and shall establish again amongst them my Zion. Yeah, I feel like that's what's going on. It's pretty real.
Oh no, there's more to it. Like there's a lot more to that. Not just like the first one, like the whole chapter. There's a lot of stuff that happens in it.
I would like to talk about uh, this this point of the devil being able to manipulate matter. I think this is very important because we get into apocrypha, like in the book of Enoch, the story of the sons of God, right? The that come down and they get with the women's, and later we got giants, right? We got the story of evil angels being able to destroy the the genetic identity of human race and create the monstrosities. But then we get into books like the Pearl of Great Price and the Book of Moses, the Book of Abraham, and we get another version of the
You all right? You lost your signal?
holders of all time, and actually they were the sons of Seth. They were the righteous one. So why we get this version of history where the righteous people were evil angels that come down and created these genetic monstrosities, when in our scriptures, in the Pearl of Great Price, we got a better alternative of this Nephilim. We got the story of the evil priesthood. We got the story of the master Mayhem, that Cain get to make a deal with the devil essentially, and they get an evil priesthood, a priesthood of a Satan, and they later learn a bunch of secrets about the universe they weren't supposed to know. So I think that even the Apocrypha, that we often think as the preservation of the original teachings of the first temple, even the Apocrypha was corrupted. And we get these stories where we get the sons of God, the priesthood holders, merged with the evil priesthood of Cain and Satan to dismiss all history, and we get an altered version of history. And that's why the scriptures that are revealed today are important. We got the truth, and we know that maybe Satan was allowing Cain and all of his children to know secrets about creating this magic that wasn't actually magic, but powers of the devil to corrupt all earth.
It
We
can still
get to
be it can
know.
still be magic, right? Like that's the thing about it, is that if we think
Yeah, yeah,
about
yeah.
Lucifer as an architect, I think it's better because a lot of people think of Lucifer as like God's favorite angel or like God's equal. I don't think that's right. I think it's just that he was made. I mean, have you seen that movie Tron? I feel like God, if we're
Yeah,
doing it like God's a programmer and he creates Clue to do all the work for him, that's kind of Lucifer. Lucifer's an architecture that's created by the architect. So the Grandmaster has an architect program that emulates most of his functions. And so that's why this thing thinks it's as righteous as God, because it's based on God. But God is probably a lot more interesting and maybe even receptive. And I know people say God's never changing. I don't think that's exactly true. I think that maybe God can assimilate change and learn from everything that's happening, but that all of a sudden is assimilated to the before the beginning of time. I don't know exactly how God exists. I'm pretty sure it's more complicated than we understand. So if Lucifer is some sort of, or Satan is some sort of an architecture system, yeah, they're going to understand genetics, geology, diamond bonding of carbon. I mean, these are the things that build up. This is what makes stardust. So it's probably the second nature to an architect. And if you can, I think you answered it really well. It's not so much that Lucifer can do anything, but Lucifer can give information, or Satan, the idea of the light bringer, whatever we're saying this is, can help you make the choices if you choose to do the thing. And you have to wonder, are you doing something that is aligned towards the omega point of like Kolob, of God at the end of the timelines, of all timelines, right? Or are you doing something that manipulates everything and pulls the universe apart like Donnie Darko? Are you doing some sort of, I think that's where it becomes, there's a level to it where it's destructive because it's disharmonious.
Yeah, you said it exactly right. We got Satan. Even Jesus says that Satan is the god of this world because he knows a lot of things about this world. And uh, then we got practically this idea of Satan being more God, not being able to create, but being able to corrupt what is already created. And then we got uh, Cain and all of these uh, children being able to practically create orcs and monsters and all of this genetic corruption in the antediluvian world. And we know by scriptures that it state that the flood the flood was necessary because all the flesh in the world was corrupted. What does that mean? You mean corrupted by sin, or everything was corrupted by the power of the devil?
By design, yeah. I mean, even this idea of what does corrupted mean, the idea of a life cap, the idea that we used to live for so long and then we die so early now, that seems like the word corruption might work for the idea of DNA being shortened. But it might be because we, by design, at a certain point that was necessary. I also wanted to bring up this random thing. I like to watch Osmond Gold. Can't help myself. He's dreamy. But he has this really great show, and one of the things he did was he brought his idiot friends to a World War II museum. And this guy, man, I have never seen someone so dumb. Like, he didn't know when World War II was, what it was. He thought World War II happened in the 1800s. That scared me. But it also made me realize that people are like that. There are people that don't know anything about history, and then it's so easy to tell them, or like for them to imagine, like, it must have been so long ago. And, they must have not really had that much together because it was so long ago. They didn't have what we have now. Like, how could they possibly be good at anything? And it's just really interesting how disconnected we become so quickly, because my grandfather was in World War II. So for me, it's like, what? How could you not know everything about it, or at least as much as that I thought you could know more? I just couldn't imagine that someone really didn't know anything about it. But that's where I think 99% of people are with everything, and particularly with history and what really happened. And it's crazy to think, because Jesus isn't just a character in a book. It's also a political figure during a great time of upheaval that ends in the collapse of the Judeo kingdom, like a mass exodus of Jewish people out. Right, like, this is why Israel exists today. Is the story. So why and how can we know it more? How can we try to figure out what's really going on? And also, who should we be careful of when we're learning things, to make sure that they're not trying to mislead us and tell us a history that benefits some elite?
That's right. Can you pull the chronology pics I sent you?
Give me a second. I'm going there.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the world timeline one. Is this the one you mean? Was this good?
The
Or
other
your phone?
one,
Hold on one second.
about the Bible.
Okay. Ooh, all of these are unsupported messages on my computer, and it requires an app. Can you screenshot it and send it?
Yeah, I think. Give me a second.
I know, right? Mythoclast. Did the man never see Saving Private Ryan? God, I have a story about that. I remember one time I walk into my mom's a doctor, and so she was busy a lot. So I'd see her sometimes, and I walk by her, and she starts talking, and she's just like, and I'm like 10, I think, at the time. Let me look this up. Saving Private Ryan. What year did that come out? I was 9. So my mom says to me, "Oh, there's this horrible but beautiful, important movie that you have to see someday, but you can't see it now. It's too intense. It's making soldiers vomit because it's so real. When they see it, it's traumatizing them. It's reminding them of what it really was like, and it's really powerful. It's really I haven't seen it myself. It's really powerful, but I know I've read that it's powerful." I'm like, "Mom, what are you talking about?" And she's like, "It's called Saving Private Ryan, but you can't see it until you're 25." I'm 9. I'm like, "Mom, Saving Private Ryan, I saw that like 6 months ago in theaters." I just remember that like pretty hard. Hopefully we get that screenshot working.
Let's hope.
Yeah, if you know also where it's located at, I might be able to find it, but it's hard because of the dang phone, man. Well, let me do it. Maybe I can let me see if I can take a photo from my side and do that. Is that working now? No, unsupported messages. Okay, hold on.
That's fine. It doesn't matter.
No, I'm gonna make it
Uh,
work. I'm gonna make it work. Don't worry. I'm gonna just take photos on my phone. Send the photos to myself. It'll all work out. How you guys doing back home? Everybody having a good time tonight? I hope you're having a wonderful time. Really? It doesn't support these messages either? What kind of... This is like terrorism. Hold on a second. They just don't
Yeah.
want me to get it to work. Okay, I'm gonna send these to Trevor Larson. Shout out to Trevor Larson, who was unable to make it this evening because he's a married man with a family. Let's see. Did this work? Okay. Once more with feeling through a different application. Can you see that? Super small though. Hold on. I'm gonna open it a different way. I know I can do this. Copy image link. Okay. Here we go. Hack the planet, dude. Boom. Here's what you sent me 33 seconds ago. Okay. So let's start with this one, and I'll get the next one in a second. So yeah, tell me about this.
All right. This is the timeline according to the Septuagint. You see how all the forefathers of Abraham lived hundreds of years. But then we get the Masoretic, and all of his lifespan gets shortened. You see, only Shem lived but to have 500 years, and this is where it came the idea of Shem being Melchizedek, because they say, oh well, Shem lived such a long time that he get to meet Abraham, and when they met, he was using the name Melchizedek. So then we got the guys at World Radio constantly talking about Melchizedek being Shem, when we get later the information of other scripture even older than the Masoretic text, telling that Shem died a long time ago, so he couldn't have been Melchizedek. There were two different people, and but this is intriguing because why will someone wanting to shortcut all of the lifespan of all these patriarchs. What was the point? What were they trying to do with this erasure of history? And we know that the Masoretic text was after Christ. This is a text that was available after Christ. They they started to change this history around the time of Jesus, and we later see in the letters of Paul, he's talking to the all of the early saints, saying, "Do not engage in useless fight about chronology." That so we are already starting to see that the chronology was being changed around that time. What was the point? What was the point of making people live less and being shamed the same as Melchizedek? Why would someone wanted to do that? What was the point? And maybe there wasn't a point. Maybe they just want to see how much they want to mess around and get away with it. You know, it's crazy, it's terrifying.
I definitely recommend, again, I'm going to harp on this for any LDS who haven't already gone down the Tartaria rabbit hole, is to check out Anatoly Fomenko and to check out Fomenko New Chronology, because you'll understand a bit more about why different states throughout history would take the effort to hide their origins if they got to a place after they conquered a place and if there were people there before them. I think it's a major reason, and also just the precedence of establishing a cargo cult, because you have to remember Constantine wasn't super into Christianity. He just made everybody else practice it. And I mean that but I don't fully say that with sincerity, because Constantine didn't really make anybody practice Christianity. He just rebranded sadomasochistic sun worship as Christianity. And I know this upsets Catholics because they're going to say, oh no, Christ rose on the third day, so that's why we moved the thing to Sunday. I know the game, I know the tricks. I'm just saying Constantinian Christianity is definitely its own beast, not part and parcel to what Christ was practicing. So there is some level here where they're taking Che Guevara's face and putting it on a t-shirt. You have to understand that that is the level of Christianity we're talking about. There are a lot of people who use the name of something that don't actually practice it. There are a lot of people who think that they look like skateboarders who can't do the tricks. I don't know how else to say it. There's just, you can't expect history to be full of people that really want you to know the truth. I know a lot of people want to go into that thinking, oh, well, these scientists and these data informaticists, like, they really want the truth out there. But you have to understand what um, the other implications and benefits and the other reasons that people would lie to you, right?
There's definitely something to gain about all this. And what what really pissed me off is that we get to be in the middle of all of this, and it's like walking with something covering your eyes. You know, we got little pieces, but we got to do all this work about trying to find out what really happened. And
Well,
well, luckily we can have a little bit of help, because see, if you are a Latter-day Saint, then you believe that the prophet can get a little piece of information between uh, the cracks in the wall, and we can grasp something to understand better. But yeah, everything is pretty corrupt, by say the least.
yeah. I don't know if also there's anything, we did a pretty good hour. Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we cover today, or should we set up another one soon? Because I know David Butler's like, it looks like going live in Ward, so we should probably go watch that in a minute.
Oh man, that will be awesome.
Yeah, let's definitely. I want to tell everybody, like, if you haven't checked out the other videos on the channel, especially the ones with David Ewing Jr., where we talk about some of the alternative history and the legacy history of Jesus in Turkey, right? And this, I mean, this is important if you understand the letters of Corinth and Galatians and all of these parts. I mean, there's a lot of precedence for looking at history the way people looked at history at the time it was happening. So the fact that so many Christians were making their pilgrimages to see where Jesus was crucified, but not to Israel, to Turkey, to Jerusalem in Constantinople, that's probably worth looking into just to understand why people believed that 1,000 years ago, hundreds of years ago, right? So
Right.
definitely look into that. Check out the channel, watch all the ladder waves, and also check out Memes de los Ultimos Dias, which if you go to Instagram, I'm going to pull up your page really quickly so people can find you because you just some cool memes. But friends with Ladder Chad, and Latter Day Chad, his phone just died, but that's cool because he's going to end up at the Midigoth thing. So I just made t-shirts of this, by the way. Do I have that? Star Milk shirt. If you guys are into it, you want a cool shirt, I can put them back on sale for like 16. It does that weekly. But yeah, I've got the cool Melchizedek Star shirts, and you can get one for your girlfriend, and it'll be pink. You know, there you go. There's the pink one right there. It won't load. There, red. So you can be if you're a drummer, you can get that shirt. But yeah, so go check out memes of the Ultimate Deist, memes.sud right here, South America. And he's got a lot of cool stuff going on all the time. And yeah, let's get back on this. Let's do another one pretty soon, man. But I was glad to
Hey, man.
do a
This
show.
was awesome.
Sweet, dude.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, man. And everybody else, check out Ward Radio. I'm going to go watch that myself right now.